In May 2006, a Mount Martha Access Ministries volunteer presenter of primary school Christian religious instruction, or SRI as it is termed in Victoria, had an idea. Wouldn't it be wonderful if an evangelical Christian lay missionary could be planted in as many state schools as possible across Mornington Peninsula? The same state school Christian religious instructor shared his fancy with local federal member Greg Hunt, who suggested that the idea should immediately be placed before then Prime Minister John Howard. Mr. Howard, in what a journalist would later describe as a rush of blood to his head, was enraptured by the state school religious instructor's whim. But why stop at Mornington? Or Victoria? Let's go national. After all, with an election looming in 2007, this could just be the stunt to impress the religious right, Wizard of Oz powerful, moralistic minority also known as the Australian Christian Lobby, which at the time was led by the often controversial Jim Wallace. Just a few weeks later, on June 11, 2006, with obscene haste, and without any parliamentary scrutiny or consultation and any stated, defined or required outcomes whatsoever, the planned introduction of what was to become the $500 million National Schools Chaplaincy Program, the NSCP, was announced. The announcement was met with a tsunami of outraged negative comment from the media, political commentators and education unions amongst many others. Within a June 11, 2006 article in the Melbourne Age, Mary Blewett, then president of the Victorian branch of the Australian Education Union, described the proposed National School Chaplaincy Program as sickening, while adding, "This goes to the very heart of our secular education system. It's also another backhanded swipe at the teaching profession in government schools, as if we somehow don't have values." Greg Hunt, self-acclaimed co-conspirator of the National School Chaplaincy Program, was mentioned in the same story. Mr. Hunt slammed state school systems for being anti-religious and said it was time the Commonwealth intervened to give government-educated children a chance. In October 2006, while officially launching the National School Chaplaincy Program on ABC television, John Howard could not have stated the true intent of the NSCP more bluntly. Students need the guidance of chaplains, rather than just counsellors. Yes, I am calling them chaplains because that has a particular connotation in our language. And as you know, I'm not ever overwhelmed by political correctness. To call a chaplain a counsellor is to bow to political correctness. Chaplain has a particular connotation. People understand it. They know exactly what I'm talking about. So, from January 2007, courtesy of millions of dollars in Commonwealth cash, thousands of often totally unqualified and predominantly evangelical Protestant lay chaplains were slam-dunked into the state schools of Australia, more often than not with little or no supposedly required school community consultation whatsoever. Chaplains who could be as candid as this about their true missionary purpose as so accurately foretold by John Howard.
I personally believe, and as a chaplain, I believe that Jesus is the way, truth and life. But and that can come through in our conversation. But young people know that. I'm the chaplain in the school. They know what they're going to get. They know that I'm the Gotti. So they come to me, young people and staff, knowing that, and I guess expecting me to speak about that.
A Labor victory in the November 24, 2007 federal election resulted in Kevin Rudd becoming Prime Minister of Australia. The initial 3-year, $160 million term of the NSCP was to expire at the end of 2010, and by August 2009, the parachurch employers of Commonwealth-funded school chaplains were already beginning to demand that the Kevin Rudd Labor government commit to an extension of funding. In early November 2009, it was announced that Kevin Rudd was to provide the keynote address at the Australian Christian Lobby National Conference in Canberra on the 21st of the same month. During his November 21, 2009 Australian Christian Lobby Conference keynote address, Kevin Rudd, while expressing his ecstatic support for federally funded school chaplaincy, pledged $42 million in federal money to carry the NSCP through to 2011.
School chaplains are making a difference. That is why today I can confirm that the government will be continuing the school chaplaincy program. This will involve a total additional investment of some $42 million over the 2010 and 2011 school years.
That $42 million was to become a neat $50 million. Within the same speech, Kevin Rudd took full credit for formalising Queensland State School Chaplaincy in 1991. I have been a supporter of school chaplaincy since my time in the Queensland Government almost 20 years ago, as Chief of Staff to Premier Wayne Goss and then as Director General of the Cabinet Office. It was during this period that we formalised arrangements through the State Education Department for school chaplains to operate in our schools. The Queensland Department of Education formally approved the Scripture Union of Queensland as the employing authority for state school chaplains. On June 23, 2010, Julia Gillard toppled Kevin Rudd to become Prime Minister of Australia. Federal funding of the NSCP, now having cost Australian taxpayers $210 million, was to expire at the end of 2011. Kevin Rudd is quoted by highly reliable sources as having stated in December 2011, "The only reason Julia Gillard is in power is because of a deal she did with the Australian Christian lobby." To be fair, it's possible that Kevin Rudd was referring to the same Australian Christian lobby deal he inherited from John Howard in 2007. 2 weeks before the federal election on August 21, 2010, on August 6, 2010, Julia Gillard made a video pledge regarding the NSCP to then Australian Christian lobby Managing Director Jim Wallace. Current ACL Managing Director Lyle Shelton, at the time Chief of Staff, describes how it came to be.
During the 2010 election campaign, the Prime Minister's office actually contacted Australian Christian Lobby about 2 weeks out from the August 2010 election and asked to get some messages across to the Christian constituency. And because we'd had our Make It Count event with Tony Abbott and Kevin Rudd just 2 days before Kevin Rudd lost the Prime Ministership, I guess the new Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, was looking for a way to reach out to the constituency. So ACL's Managing Director, Jim Wallace, flew to Melbourne and recorded a half-hour video interview, which we then published on the web.
There are a lot of churches and Christians who are partnering with chaplaincy right around the country. And these people know that the unique pastoral care that's given by chaplaincy is because it draws on, particularly on its Christian faith. And just as Salvos, for instance, have a unique form of pastoral care drawing on their Christian faith in welfare area. And so their concern is very much that the program wouldn't be secularised, that it could retain this unique flavour through its link to the faith, to Christian faith. Do you see that continuing? Would that be your objective?
Yes, I do see that continuing, and I was just smiling at the reference to Salvos because I spent time, my mother worked in a Salvation Army home in South Australia, Sunset Lodge. I worked there for a period myself, just part-time when I was a teenager, so very familiar with the Salvation Army uniforms and Salvation Army approaches, so I was smiling at that. But my view about the chaplaincy program is yes, it would continue as a chaplaincy program with everything that implies.
Within 2 days of the recording of this pre-election video verbal contract with the ACL, Julia Gillard committed $222 million of federal funding to not only extend the National School Chaplaincy Program to 2014, but also to expand the NSCP to a further 1,000 schools across Australia. To date, the Commonwealth Government has wasted almost $500 million of Australian taxpayer funds on the absurd, unprecedented, bizarre, bumbling behemoth now known as the National School Chaplaincy and Student Welfare Program, the NSCSWP. Across 3 days in August 2011, in the High Court of Australia, I challenged the constitutional legitimacy of the National School Chaplaincy Program, and on June 20, 2012, a 6-1 decision in my favour was handed down by the full bench.
Here we go. Okay, today the High Court by majority held that the funding agreement
Valid.
between... What's that? is invalid. That's between the Commonwealth and the Scripture Union. So we succeeded.
Unfortunately for the federal government, a tranche of $16.44 million, now deemed to be invalid, was due to be paid in 10 days' time by June 30 to parachurch chaplaincy providers including Access Ministries and Scripture Union Queensland, the non-government defendant in my first and now second High Court challenge. On June 20, 2012, within a couple of hours of my High Court decision declaring federal funding of the NSCP to be invalid, then Australian Christian Lobby Managing Director Jim Wallace was quoted in the Sydney Morning Herald as stating, "The High Court decision that government funding of chaplaincy in Queensland schools is invalid is only a technicality and will not mean the end of the program. The government is committed to the program and I expect it will find an appropriate way of directing the funds. I'd anticipate it will move quickly. We are talking about a bureaucratic solution." By mid-afternoon on the day of my decision, then Education Minister Peter Garrett and Attorney General Nicola Roxon called an emergency media conference.
Our expectation is that chaplains will remain in schools around the country.
During the conference, Nicola Roxon used various terms to describe methods by which the High Court's pesky decision might be remedied, the most quaint being that there would be a cure. And that cure was announced on June 25, a mere 5 days after my successful High Court decision, when then Education Minister Peter Garrett called another media conference to proclaim the introduction of emergency legislation to keep Commonwealth cash flowing to the parachurch employers of school chaplains. The fact is that the next tranche of payments owed to providers, and this is an update for you really, since when we last spoke to you, until the end of the financial year, is $16.44 million. And that will be owed to some 160 providers who employ chaplains and student welfare workers working in about 1,674 schools. In terms of the largest single payments, there they go across to Scripture Union in Queensland, some $5.7 million, the Schools Ministries Group in South Australia, some $2.6 million, Youth Care Western Australia, $2.5 million, and Access Ministries in Victoria, $2.17 million. So it's very important that we see the passage of legislation through the Parliament to make sure that school chaplains and student welfare workers can continue to be supported. That's the commitment that this government's made, and we'll be introducing legislation into the House tomorrow to ensure that that's the case. The resulting Financial Framework Legislation Amendment Bill No. 3, 2012, generally regarded as nothing more than a government open-season pork barrelling permit, was manically rushed through both Houses of Parliament with bipartisan support on June 26, 27 and 28, 2012. That is, 6 days after my positive High Court decision and 2 days before the $16.44 million parachurch cash payments were due. Within an August 2012 Sydney Morning Herald opinion piece titled "Stupidity is on the Rise in Our Age of Enlightenment," Barry Jones delightfully described the circumstances. The High Court's recent decision that Commonwealth funding for school chaplains was unconstitutional was immediately bypassed by a cross-party love-in, hurriedly passing new legislation to nullify the court's judgment. Hansard reveals that while endorsing the emergency legislation in the lower house, Greg Hunt, while accurately and proudly claiming his 2006 co-paternity of the National Schools Chaplaincy Program, described it as the Chaplaincy Support and Protection Bill. George Brandis, now Attorney General of Australia, while endorsing the bill in the Senate on 27 June 2012, was most scathing in his scorn for the controversial bill, describing it as particularly inept. Within the same Senate speech, Attorney General George Brandis, in supporting his argument regarding the FLL Amendment Bill's shortcomings, quoted Professor Anne Toomey thus: "This bill, in a bald-faced manner, rejects the fundamental propositions put by the High Court in the Williams case. The Commonwealth is clearly asking for another clobbering by the court. In August 2013, writs relating to my second High Court challenge were served upon the Commonwealth of Australia, the Federal Minister for Education and Scripture Union Queensland. Intervening submissions have been received from the Attorneys General of New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, South Australia, Western Australia and Tasmania. All 6 states support the Williams No. 1 decision of June 2012, disagree with the Commonwealth that the Appropriation Acts have the power, agree that Section 32B of the Financial Management and Accountability Act is invalid, and do not believe the chaplaincy program falls within the Corporation's Power Section 51(20) or Benefits to Students Section 51(23)(a). My case will be heard by the High Court of Australia in Canberra on May 6, 7 and 8, 2014. There are substantial costs yet to be met in the lead-up to my May 2014 High Court hearing, and beyond that, through to a decision being handed down, hopefully later in the year. Information regarding donations toward my legal costs and disbursements can be found at highcourtchallenge.com. Any assistance will be greatly appreciated, and to the many hundreds of concerned parents and citizens who have helped me to date, please accept a huge thank you.